Hello, sleepy soul. The night is quiet, the world is asleep, and something is waiting in the dark. Before we begin, subscribe to the channel and write your country and current time in the comments. Now listen carefully. Rain drummed against the hospital windows, thin at first, then steady. Neon signs outside smeared across the glass in long, red streaks. I gripped my bag tighter as I walked the empty corridor. Night shift. First week. New city. New life. I had moved here for work and distance. Distance from an apartment that smelled of stale coffee and arguments. Distance from the apartment I shared once, where silence had become louder than love. Divorce hadn't broken me, it had hollowed me. I was raw, a quiet wound wrapped in hospital scrubs. The night smelled of antiseptic and wet asphalt. Footsteps echoed. Machines hummed softly, the heart monitor beeping like a restrained pulse. I could hear distant sirens, muted laughter from the cafeteria across the hall, the squeak of nurses' shoes on polished linoleum. Alone, I felt every sound amplified. It started with the patient's whispering. "Do you see it?" A frail man muttered in the dark of room 12. "See who?" I asked. "The visitor," he said, voice trembling. "Only in the mirror." I frowned. Mirrors were rare in patient rooms, small and scratched. He gestured toward the bathroom, its fluorescent light flickering. "She comes every night. Looks like someone you know, someone you've lost." I chalked it up to delirium, medication, sleep deprivation. I wanted to believe that. Maybe I was overthinking. I told myself it made sense. By my third night, I noticed it too. Passing the nurse's station, I caught movement in the reflective surface of the reception glass. A silhouette, my own shape, but wrong. Slightly taller, shoulders sharper, head tilted with deliberate curiosity. It mirrored me, but it wasn't me. I froze. The fluorescent lights buzzed. A phone vibrated on the counter. Somewhere in the distance, a floor creaked. "Marcus," a patient whispered, but his eyes were closed. The name wasn't mine. Just a fragment of the night seeping into language. Her name was Alara. She appeared in the break room, one night while I sat sipping tepid coffee, staring at my reflection in the water-stained tile. She smiled, quiet, calm, careful, and slid into the seat opposite me. "You look tired," she said. Her voice was measured, soft, like she had rehearsed kindness to soothe a stranger. "I am," I admitted. "First week on night shift. It gets to you." She nodded knowingly. "It changes you. The quiet, the hum of machines, the endless cycle of breaths and beeps. You notice everything and nothing." Her observation was comforting, warm even. I wanted to believe it. She seemed attuned, attentive, emotionally intelligent. Over the next week, she appeared almost everywhere. She knew my coffee order, my route through the hallways, the exact moment I paused to stare at monitors, checking vitals. Subtle details, how I folded my scrubs, the scar on my wrist from years ago, the old nickname my first patients had given me in training. I rationalized. She's just perceptive. Maybe she's familiar with routines. Maybe I'm imagining it. Then came the impossible details. A voice note on my phone at 2:17 a.m., labeled "Marcus, don't forget," though I hadn't saved it. Emails in my work account I didn't send, referencing my shift patterns, my patient interactions, even conversations with Alara. Photos of me sleeping in the break room chair, taken at angles no one could reach unnoticed. I stopped sleeping. The hospital hummed constantly at night, ventilators for pumps, distant pagers, my own shallow breathing. I kept imagining shadows leaning into mirrors, silhouettes standing just behind me waiting. One patient, room 12 again, whispered, "You're her now." The visitor. "She's gone." I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked. "The one in the mirror," he said. "Every night she comes. Every night someone new stands there, and the others are trapped. She's waiting for you to finish the cycle." I laughed weakly. "I don't understand." "You will," he said, eyes half closed. Alara continued to watch, calm, observing. Sometimes her presence was comforting, almost tender, but it grew invasive. She knew when I took extra breaks, when I hesitated with a patient, when I frowned at a monitor reading. She never touched anything, never approached directly, just watched. Red flags appeared. Subtle, unsettling. Her messages on my work chat referenced moments I hadn't shared. A playlist appeared on my phone labeled Marcus's Nights. Songs I hadn't downloaded. Songs I hummed to myself while charting vitals. My reflection in mirrors began acting independently. A smirk when I was still. A nod when I did not. I wanted to believe it was coincidence. Maybe I was overthinking. I told myself it made sense. The spiral continued. Every night, the patients whispered, more agitated. Their eyes followed my movements like I was a phantom. I woke one night, heart thudding, to find my reflection standing by the nurse's station, staring at the sleeping patients. I hadn't moved. I hadn't left my room. Yet there it was, smiling. I ran, stumbling into hallways. Phones buzzed with unknown texts. You've arrived. Begin. The hospital became a maze. Machines hummed louder. Distant music, soft jazz from the cafeteria, blended with my racing heartbeat. Footsteps echoed behind me, though no one was there. It was Alara who finally revealed the truth. You're the visitor, she said calmly, leaning against the wall outside the ICU. Every night, the loop begins again. The patients, the whispers, it's you. You create the cycle. You watch, and then someone else takes your place, and the loop resets. I froze. I don't understand. How, why? She smiled, observing almost tenderly. Because you notice. You're aware. But awareness is a conduit. You keep it alive. Every night, someone sees you in the reflection. Every night, they are trapped by your presence. I shook my head. No, that's impossible. You've already done it. Tonight, and tomorrow, and every night since you started. I remembered the whispers, the subtle shifts, the impossible knowledge she had of me. Every detail she had referenced, I had passed on, unknowingly. Every habit, every pause, every sigh became a seed. I contacted the police. Detective Alvarez arrived quietly, calm, methodical. Evidence compiled, metadata from hospital cameras, phone logs, chat records, voice notes. But it was different than any normal stalking case. This was temporal, psychological, a network of patterns and repetitions anchored by me, perpetuated by the invisible. Alara, or rather, the presence she represented, was dismantled. Burner phones, fake emails, manipulated records, shadow accounts. Multiple victims, multiple loops, multiple identities. She, or it, was meticulous, invasive, obsessive. When she was apprehended, she whispered softly, "You let yourself be seen." That's all it ever took. Back in my apartment, city rain tapping the window, I stare at reflections everywhere. Mirrors, glass doors, rain-streaked windows. My phone buzzes with reminders of privacy, nothing threatening, but my body reacts before my mind. I have learned to move differently, watch differently, sleep differently. I rebuilt my boundaries, but the memory of being the visitor, the power and horror of observation, is indelible. I realize now, observation is intimate. Awareness is invasive, and the line between self and reflection is thinner than we believe. Trust is not the absence of danger. Attention is not always affection. Privacy is a construct, rebuilt every day in small, deliberate acts. I survive, but I am changed. Every night, when I see my own reflection in the rain-streaked window, I remember the patient's whispers. She's here. She watches. She waits. And I know, being seen is not always being known. Story 2. Rain streaked the windows of my apartment like a confession I didn't want to read. Neon from the street below smeared across the ceiling in red and blue bruises. My kettle hummed, my phone buzzed, and somewhere far off, a saxophone played soft jazz that reminded me of evenings I had already forgotten. I had moved here after Claire left, after the divorce, after years of learning how to stay small so someone else could feel safe. My apartment was quiet, too quiet. I spent nights tracing the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, my own shallow breaths. I was a doctor. I should have understood emergencies. But grief, I learned, does not follow protocols. The next morning, or what I thought was morning, I woke to an empty hospital. Silence stretched from the ICU corridors to the elevators. The fluorescent lights flickered, buzzing faintly. My shoes scuffed against polished linoleum. The smell of antiseptic was heavy, almost sweet. "Hello?" I called. No answer. Only the soft hiss of machines in the ICU. I reached the first room. Empty. The second. Empty. My heartbeat picked up. Rain pattered on the skylights above, a staccato soundtrack. Floor creaks echoed like warnings. Then I saw him. One patient remained. Bed 12B. Connected to monitors, IVs, oxygen mask. Alive. Breathing. Alert. But the face. It looked like mine. Younger, narrower, perfectly still. "Doctor?" I whispered. My own voice sounded foreign. He opened his eyes. They were mine. I blinked. Heart in my throat. The monitor beside him beeped. Not alarming. Steady. I checked the other rooms. Monitors flatlined. Patients empty, lifeless. Beds cold. Nurses' stations abandoned. Charts untouched. Files open on computers with nothing logged. I told myself it was a dream. I wanted to believe it. The shadow, I couldn't call him, smiled faintly. Not cruel. Observant. Intelligent. Like he had been waiting. "You're early," he said, voice calm, layered with my own timbre. I shook my head. I don't understand." "You will," he said. "Eventually." I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone had hacked the hospital. Maybe I was sleep deprived. Maybe this was some psychotic break. But the feeling of being observed, catalogued, weighed heavier than explanation. Later, in the empty corridors, a new presence arrived. Lila, a trainee nurse I had mentored before the divorce. She had been checking the supply closet, arriving early. Soft voice, comforting presence. She asked questions about routines, about my habits, about details she shouldn't know. Favorite coffee mug, playlist on the tablet, how I always organized the charts. "I just remember things," she said, smiling gently. "You taught me." I told myself it made sense. Maybe I was overthinking. I wanted to believe it, but the ICU patient, the shadow, watched everything. Every decision I made. Every moral compromise. Every choice I thought private. The next day, or the next night, time was meaningless in the empty hospital. I found video files on a tablet in the nurse's lounge. They were recordings from cameras I didn't know existed. Each video captured me in real time, making decisions I barely remembered. Performing surgeries. Comforting families. Choosing whom to save when 2 lives hung in the balance. And the patient in 12B mirrored each action. Calm. Perfect. Shadow of myself. Recording. Learning. Judging. The storm outside worsened. Rain pelted the roof. Sirens wailed in the distance, muffled by fog. Neon reflections from the city's edges flickered against the windows. Phones buzzed, notifications from unknown accounts. Messages appeared. You always think about them first. You take care of everyone but yourself. You always leave a gap someone can exploit. Each one precise. Personal. Impossible to know unless someone had followed every move of my life for years. I confronted Lila. "Do you know about these recordings?" Her smile was calm, almost apologetic. "I just make sure the patient is comfortable." I pressed harder. She knew things. Things only Claire had known. The name I whispered to myself when no one was looking. Songs I listened to at night. Conversations I thought erased. "I told you," she said softly. "I just remember." I told myself I was imagining connections. Rationalizing. Trusting a familiar voice. I told myself it made sense. But the shadow in 12B began to act independently. Not reacting. Initiating. Whispering my thoughts aloud in the same soft tone I used when alone. Not audible to the rest of the hospital, but I heard. "I didn't deserve her love," it said one night. "I wanted to be better. I didn't." I froze. That was my memory. My guilt. My confession. The spiral accelerated. Each day, or what I thought was a day, the hospital grew more unreal. Empty. Silent except for humming machines. Footsteps in hallways that vanished. phones buzzing with recordings of my own voice saying things I hadn't said, emails appearing from accounts I didn't own. I found files of previous patients, shadow versions of other doctors, other moral choices, other hospitals, missing people, carefully curated moral experiments. The shadow finally spoke my name clearly. "You're late," it said. "Every choice leaves a trace." I realized then, the ICU patient was not human in the conventional sense. It was an archive of me, of every moral decision I had made, every life I had touched, every compromise, every error, everything I had thought private. Lila finally admitted it, calm, observant. "I've been watching for years. Your routines, your choices, your regrets. Every doctor leaves a shadow. Yours was interesting. The horror was not violence, not screams, not supernatural. The horror was exposure. Intimacy weaponized, privacy erased, life reconstructed like an exhibit." The climax arrived when police traced emergency calls from the hospital after one of the shadow recordings leaked. They found cameras, metadata, burner phones, emails from fake accounts tracking staff, patients, and visitors. Evidence of a long-term manipulation campaign. Lila, or rather, the operator behind her identity, was arrested. The ICU shadow patient was contained, preserved as evidence. I survived physically, but not mentally intact. Each day, I check reflections, windows, screens, appliances humming. My own voice sometimes seems to come from devices I don't own. I learned morality is never private. Attention can be invasive. Familiarity can be weaponized. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my apartment, listening to rain against the glass, the hum of my refrigerator, the faint jazz from a cafe across the street, and wonder if my own shadow is watching, cataloging, recording. And I remind myself, survival does not erase the lessons. Control is never absolute. Privacy is fragile. Trust must be measured. Every moral choice leaves a mark. Every choice is a story someone else might someday read. And some stories are written not for you, but about you. Story 3. Rain streaked the hospital windows, distorting the neon of the city below into liquid rubies and cobalt. I stood by the operating room door, scrubbed and tense, listening to the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional squeak of wheels in the hallway. The smell of antiseptic mixed with my own sweat. My hands trembled, not from the procedure ahead, but from everything I had left behind in the city. Divorce, emotional abuse, the slow erosion of trust. I had moved here for work, thinking routine would mend the edges. But edges don't mend. They just shift. And tonight, I was supposed to perform a routine cholecystectomy. Routine. Simple. Safe. Dr. Kwan, my supervising surgeon, approached. Her voice was calm, precise, warm in the way that makes strangers feel understood. "You ready?" she asked. She knew I carried more than surgical stress. She noticed the tremor in my left hand, the hesitation in my jaw. I nodded, grateful for her silent attention, for her careful gaze that didn't demand explanation. The patient, a 50-year-old man with a gallbladder complaint, was sedated on the table. The monitors hummed a steady rhythm. Machines clicked, hissed, beeped, the normal orchestra of surgery. Outside, the rain hammered the city, distant sirens wailing through fogged streets. I made the first incision. Scalpel in hand, the sterile smell heavy in my nose, I felt the usual focus settle over me. 1 heartbeat. 2. The rhythm of normalcy. Then the first anomaly. The patient's fingers twitched. A slight movement, almost imperceptible. Anesthesia was deep. Impossible. Dr. Kwan leaned over. "Did you feel that?" I shook my head. Muscle spasm, maybe. But then the scalpel disappeared. My hand reached out. Nothing. No instrument. Just the sterile air. "Where's the clamp?" I whispered. "Check the table," she replied. The instruments were gone. All of them. Not just misplaced, vanished. The table was bare. The monitors flickered. Heart rate, oxygen saturation, blood pressure, all normal. But new names scrolled across the display. Names I didn't recognize. Vital signs for patients who had never been admitted. Who? I asked, voice tight. Dr. Kwan's brow furrowed. I don't know. I told myself it made sense. Maybe a software glitch, a misconnection. Maybe I was seeing patterns in exhaustion. I wanted to believe it. The shadows of the room grew heavier. Every reflection on the polished floor, every gleam on stainless steel seemed sharper, more deliberate. The overhead lights flickered. Machines hummed in odd syncopation. Then came the whispers. Soft, almost imperceptible at first, like the wind brushing through an empty apartment at night. I spun. No one. Only the sterile walls. Only the wet echoes of the city outside. Dr. Kwan's voice. Stay calm. Focus. I nodded, but the calm didn't reach my chest. Then the monitors shifted again. More names. More heart rates. Vital signs from people whose faces I had never seen. Children, elderly patients, a man with my own last name. Every time I blinked, new entries appeared. I glanced at my assistant, Rachel. She was new, recruited from another hospital. Attentive, reassuring, perfectly calm. She had been helping me prep, noting my routine, reminding me of my scrubbing order, my favorite gloves, even my old nickname from residency, June. I had never told anyone outside my old team. She whispered, "It's okay. You're okay. Just follow the rhythm." I told myself it made sense. Maybe exhaustion. Maybe paranoia. Maybe her observation was coincidental. I wanted to believe it. The patient moved again, this time bending slightly at the neck, eyes fluttering beneath the anesthesia mask. Impossible. My own heart raced, thundering against the sterile silence. I reached for the suction. It disappeared in my hand. The table seemed to dissolve and reform, instruments vanishing as quickly as I could locate them. Then the operating room shifted. Walls seemed longer, ceiling higher. Shadows pooled unnaturally. The monitors now displayed a repeating pattern of names. Patients who had died in our hospital years ago. Cases I had witnessed, procedures I had assisted in, mistakes I had made. Every error replayed. Every forgotten precaution logged. Every lapse tracked. I tried to breathe. Tried to center myself. The rain outside intensified. Neon reflected off puddles, distorted by fog. My phone buzzed in my locker, faint but insistent. I ignored it. The whispers grew louder. I realized with a sinking feeling that the operating room itself was learning, observing, manipulating, replaying mistakes until someone inside it would pay. Rachel leaned close. Listen to me. The room, it reflects. It amplifies. Follow its rhythm, don't fight it. Impossible details began to assert themselves. I noticed how Rachel anticipated my movements, adjusted my scrubs before I reached, handed instruments before I asked, murmured my private notes from earlier surgeries, the ones I had kept only in digital files. I wanted to believe she was merely attentive. Maybe I was overthinking. I told myself it made sense. But when I turned to ask her, she smiled knowingly, almost too knowingly. You've always been precise with your left hand. You hesitate at the third suture. You always recheck the clamps, even when confident. The room notices. A floor creak echoed, though the room was empty. A monitor flickered. The patient's heart rate rose for a name I had never seen, then dropped back to normal as if acknowledging my hesitation. Then it lunged, a metaphorical lunge. The instruments returned, only to vanish the next second. Vital signs jumped. Shadows pooled and retreated. I realized we were no longer performing surgery on one patient. The room had multiplied itself. Every corner, every wall, every sterile reflection had become a surveillance camera, recording every tremor, every thought, every hesitation. I shouted, "Step back." Rachel's eyes were calm, almost intimate. The room is alive, but it isn't sentient like a human. It learns. It mirrors. It punishes errors. A buzzing phone. A faint AI-generated voice, my own, whispered reminders of old mistakes, wrong incisions, misread monitors, my own lapses from years past. I wanted to leave, but the doors no longer opened. The lights flickered. The walls shifted. Footsteps echoed in hallways that didn't exist. every movement repeated, every error magnified. The climax unfolded over minutes that felt like hours. Emergency protocols failed. Monitors displayed fatal readings for people who had never existed. Every door led back to the same room. Machines hummed. Shadows pooled. The police arrived later, after frantic calls from Rachel's mobile line, metadata tracing the hospital network, AI logs revealing a manipulator's hand. Simon, a consultant brought in ostensibly to help with system maintenance, whose digital surveillance, AI manipulation, and obsession with surgical routines had constructed the room into a trap, replaying mistakes until someone broke under it. Simon had been collecting private habits, monitoring routines, recording voice notes, even training AI to mimic my past instructions and lapses. Every anomaly in the or had been orchestrated. Every pulse, every monitor readout, every shadow had been manipulated. I survived. The room was dismantled. The hospital reopened. But months later, I still hear the hum of machines in silence, the soft echo of footsteps behind closed doors, the flicker of neon reflections on rain-slicked streets. I still wake at night, heartbeat fast, imagining instruments vanishing, monitors scrolling impossible names, walls shifting like liquid steel. I learned that obsession can be patient, meticulous, and quietly invasive. It does not shout, it records, observes, waits. Trust is fragile. Memory can be manipulated. Identity is a construct easily mirrored. Safety is never absolute. The operating room no longer exists, but its pulse remains in me, a reminder that survival is not only about escaping the trap, but about understanding how the trap learned your patterns and how it will always echo in your memory. Story 4. The rain started before I even reached the hospital. Thin, persistent sheets tapping the windshield, blurring streetlights into red and gold ghosts. I parked under the flickering neon of the emergency sign. Steam rose from a grate, curling into the fog. My fingers trembled around the steering wheel. I had moved across the city after Claire left. 3 months of cold apartments, silent nights, and the humming of appliances that reminded me I was alone. I wanted escape. I wanted distance. I wanted to feel safe in the quiet. But hospitals carry a different silence. One that listens. Patients whispered about room 13. No door, no record. Staff denied its existence. Yet the reports were consistent. Voices drifting through the corridors at night. Murmurs you could almost understand. Soft footsteps where none should be. I was a temporary night nurse, hired for the week to cover staffing gaps. My supervisor, Mara, was calm, careful, and attentive in ways I hadn't realized I craved. She knew my name before the morning briefing. She asked questions without prying, listened without judgment. I wanted to believe she was safe. The first time I heard it, I was walking down the corridor at 2:14 a.m. The fluorescent lights flickered, humming low. Rain tapped the windows at the end of the hall. A faint voice called, "Mark." I froze. No one. I rationalized it. Maybe exhaustion, maybe echoes from the emergency room. My hands still shook. The floor creaked beneath each step. The distant hum of a ventilator sounded like breathing. Then I heard it again. "Why are you here?" Closer this time, behind a wall that didn't exist on the map. I followed the sound, heart thrumming. The hallway seemed longer than it should. Doors I had never noticed lined the walls, each numbered, then 1, 13. I tried the handle. Locked, but the door vibrated slightly, like it was aware of my presence. I returned to the nurse's station and found Mara already there, waiting. "You found it," she said softly. I didn't open it," I said. She smiled just slightly. Not comforting, observant. "Some things find you, Mark. Hospitals, they notice." I wanted to believe she was helping. Maybe I was overthinking. The next night, I stayed late in the corridor, pretending to organize supplies. Floorboards groaned with distant steps. Rain pattered against the high windows. I could smell antiseptic, faintly metallic. A voice note buzzed on my phone, an unknown number. I played it. A patient's voice whispered, "Room 13 is waiting." Impossible. The file said no one existed there. No one had ever been admitted. Mara appeared beside me. She smelled faintly of tea and rain. Calm. Precise. I can explain it, she said. But you have to listen. She told me the hospital doesn't admit patients. Not really. It predicts them. Every case, every injury, every death, it records, calculates, waits. Room 13 shows what will happen. I wanted to believe it. I did. I began noticing impossible details. Emails with images of me in the staff room before I arrived. Metadata showing logs of devices I didn't own. Notes in my handwriting I didn't remember writing. Mara knew things. My favorite coffee, my old nickname from childhood, the playlist I hummed while cleaning rooms. She didn't ask. She only observed. I rationalized it. She's good at her job. She's meticulous. She's aware. Maybe I was overthinking. Ich spent Nordspirum listening, waiting, breathing in the hospital's cold, humming silence. Shadows stretched across walls. Distant sirens pulsed through the foggy windows. Occasionally, a piano riff from somewhere far away, a soft jazz tune drifting through the ventilation system. Then the room revealed itself. Through a cracked panel in the wall, I saw the scene inside, my own death. Not next week, not months from now. Soon. Terrible, mundane, unavoidable. The image flickered, alive like a feed from the future. I stumbled back, heart racing. The hospital floorboards creaked beneath me. My phone buzzed again. Unknown number. See what waits for you. I looked at Mara. Her eyes were calm, watching me. I wanted to believe it, I whispered. You should, she said. Her voice was low, observing. Knowing is survival. Weeks passed. I began seeing it everywhere. Corridors rearranged themselves. Patients who hadn't been admitted whispered in the vents. Emails arrived detailing events before they happened. Surveillance cameras showed me moving, even when I hadn't gone there. I realized I wasn't predicting anything. I was being predicted. Every fear, every hesitation, every misstep logged. Every word I whispered in the break room, every sigh in the supply closet, observed, recorded, calculated. Then the climax. I traced a signal through the hospital network. Burner phones, private servers, AI-generated voice files. The orchestrator, Max, a volunteer I had trusted. Calm, observing, attentive. He had built a persona around care and understanding. His skill was manipulation. He had used me to test Room 13. My fear, my grief, my trauma, all exploited to prove the hospital's predictive system. Police raided the hospital floor, gathering evidence. Max surrendered immediately, calm, observing, proud of his work. Cameras, logs, AI files, all collected. I survived. But the hospital, Room 13, Mara, Max, everything remains in memory. I moved to a high-floor apartment. No devices connected. Curtains drawn. Silence, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tapping of rain against the windows. Footsteps echo in my mind. I still think about the room, about the predictions, about the way observation can feel like care. Trust is fragile. Privacy is architecture. Boundaries are the only defense. Obsession masquerades as attention. And memory can be manipulated, harvested, weaponized. I survived, but the spiral leaves marks you cannot erase. Even silence has shape. Even comfort can conceal surveillance. Even hospitals can predict you before you step through their doors. Because Room 13 doesn't admit patients. It reveals them. And I have learned to watch the shadows in my own life, in case someone else is watching me. Story 5. The rain was steady that night, hitting the apartment window in the kind of rhythm that makes your chest ache. Neon from the pharmacy across the street spilled pink and blue across the wet pavement. Sirens wailed somewhere in the distance, slow and lonely. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, scrolling through messages I wasn't ready to answer. The breakup was fresh. He left, finally, after years of careful, quiet manipulation. No fights. No dramatic exits. Just absence. I moved cities to vanish from his reach. I told myself I was rebuilding. Most days I believed it. Most nights, I just lay awake listening to the hum of my fridge, wondering if moving was enough to outrun memory. That was when the message came from work. Night shift tonight. ICU elevator maintenance. Be at St. Matthias at 11. I didn't want to go. Hospitals always smelled like antiseptic and old fear, and elevators smelled like old machinery, like metal waiting to surrender. But I went. Needed the money. Needed the distraction. St. Matthias was a fortress of white tiles and echoing hallways. Rain streaked the windows, and the neon of a distant gas station cut through the fog like a warning. The main elevator was locked for maintenance. The supervisor handed me the key to a service elevator tucked in the basement corridor. It was cold inside. The walls reflected the dim fluorescent lights flickering. I pressed the button for the ground floor, expecting the usual clank and drift of an old hospital elevator. It moved smoothly, too smoothly. Halfway down, the lights dimmed. The soft mechanical hum of the motor deepened. I thought I had imagined it until the elevator stopped. The door opened on a floor I didn't recognize. No map showed it. A long corridor stretched out, walls lined with peeling paint and rusted pipes. Footsteps echoed. Not mine. A child laughing, low, familiar yet wrong. "Hello," I called. My voice sounded small. The laugh moved away, down the corridor, disappearing around corners. I stepped out, but there was no one. Just shadows stretching long and narrow in the flickering light. I rationalized it. Maintenance ghosts. My imagination. The exhaustion. I told myself it made sense. I pressed the button to return. The elevator obeyed, but the digital floor readout counted downward, past the basement. I didn't know it could do that. Then the doors opened on a room lined with beds. Old hospital beds. Sheets yellowed. Charts dusty. The smell of mildew and old decay. And on each bed a body. Not decomposed enough to be unrecognizable, but clearly old. Medical tags still clung to wrists. Eyes closed in perfect calm. I stumbled back into the elevator. Heart hammering. Breath loud in my ears. The doors closed behind me. I had to tell someone. Anyone. But when I got home, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. You shouldn't have seen that. I froze. It knew my name. The next day, I tried to sleep. The refrigerator hummed. The rain drummed. I imagined the elevator's shaft. A voice, low and quiet, whispering from the depths. "Ellie, don't leave yet." I rationalized it. Sleep deprivation, hallucinations. Anxiety. I wanted to believe it. Then I met Callum. He was quiet, thoughtful. On a dating app one had almost deleted. His profile said little. Photographer. Coffee enthusiast. Likes shadows. He noticed when I flinched at noises. He remembered the songs I hummed without thinking. When I talked about my favorite cafe, he knew the exact table I sat at. I told myself I was imagining it. Maybe I was overthinking. Weeks passed. Night shifts. Rain. Footsteps in empty hallways. The hospital service elevators seemed ordinary, until one night, the hum shifted. A body appeared inside the elevator with me. A patient who hadn't been anywhere on the roster. A face pale under flickering fluorescent light. I screamed. It vanished when I looked away. I realized then, the elevator responded to fear, to attention, to memory. It collected people who stepped inside. It remembered, and it waited. Callum's texts arrived at odd hours. Detailed, observant, sometimes recalling things I hadn't shared aloud. The smell of my mother's perfume, the birthday I had almost forgotten, the coffee I drank black when anxious. I rationalized it. He cared. He noticed. He was attentive. Until one night, the elevator's doors opened on a floor with my childhood bedroom, recreated in old hospital beds. My toys laid out on one bed. A birthday cake on a tray. A single balloon floating. Callum was there. Not his face. Mine. Watching. Smiling. "You left the door open," he said softly. "I just wanted to make sure you were safe." I realized then, he wasn't Callum. He had been calling himself that for months. Watching me. Collecting my fears. Replaying memories. Creating rooms around them. Every shift. Every night. Every abandoned corridor. He had followed. Not to harm, to own, to manipulate my nostalgia and fear. The police found him after I sent an anonymous tip. Burner phones, photos, GPS logs from the hospital elevators, audio files from my phone, surveillance footage edited and staged. He had done this to others, always people alone, always people rebuilding after loss. They arrested him quietly, methodically, calm. He never resisted. He just smiled faintly, as if disappointed. I moved away, changed cities, changed jobs, changed routines. Yet sometimes, when the rain hits my window just right, I hear the faint hum of an elevator in my apartment. My refrigerator. My phone buzzes with a notification I cannot see. A shadow stretches across the floorboards. I understand now that fear can be collected. Memory can be tracked. Nostalgia can be orchestrated. And trust is not a door to open lightly. Privacy is the right to remain uncollected. To keep your own rooms, your own memories, and your own fear unshared. I will never ride an elevator alone again. But some part of me listens anyway, to the hum beneath the hum, to the shadows that remember me, and to the child's laughter that might still echo somewhere deep below the basement. Because some fears never leave, they only wait for the doors to open. Story 6. Rain smeared the city into streaks of neon red and yellow as I walked from the station to the hospital. My coat was wet, shoes squelching against pavement puddles, and the cafe I passed smelled of strong espresso and faint cigarette smoke. Comforts I no longer recognized as mine. I had moved here for distance, a new hospital, new routines, a new version of myself. The divorce had left me hollow. Apartment silence echoed with the faint memory of laughter I no longer belonged to. I carried my loneliness like a pager clipped to my belt, always vibrating somewhere in my chest. My first night shift began with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and the low hum of monitors, ventilators, and distant elevators. The floor smelled of antiseptic and wet concrete. Footsteps echoed against polished linoleum. A patient coughed. Somewhere a floor creaked. Then I saw him, a doctor, clipboard in hand, coat pressed crisp against shoulders. Calm gait, eyes scanning charts, smiling at patients, introducing himself. Not someone I recognized, not on the staff roster. I blinked. Dr. Calloway? I asked the patient in room 18. Yes, the man replied. He's been checking in on me all week. Very thorough. I frowned. I just started here. How could a doctor I'd never met be performing rounds? I checked the digital roster. Nothing. No Calloway listed. I asked the nurse at the station. No one had ever heard the name. I told myself it made sense. Maybe a temp. Maybe a visiting physician. Maybe I was overreacting. I wanted to believe it. The next night, the phantom doctor appeared again. Patients spoke to him, followed his instructions. Charted notes in handwriting I didn't recognize. The rhythm of his visits was unnervingly precise, almost rehearsed. I shadowed him once. He passed a patient I hadn't even noticed awake, whispered instructions I couldn't hear, then vanished into a corridor with no exit. My phone buzzed, a voice note labeled Check Room 14. I had never received this number. I listened, my own voice, my own inflections, urging me to follow. My blood ran cold. She appeared shortly after. Ilara, a fellow resident from another floor, assigned to occasional cross-cover. Soft eyes, calm demeanor, warm smile. She seemed attuned to my exhaustion. Attentive, understanding. You're staring too long at the monitors, she said one night, leaning against the desk. They're not going to tell you anything new. Take a breath. Her observation felt like balm. I wanted to believe it. She remembered my coffee order, my favorite playlists, the tiny scar on my wrist from residency days, the nickname a patient had given me in my old hospital, details I never mentioned aloud. I rationalized, maybe she noticed, maybe she asked, maybe I'm reading too much into it. The impossible details escalated. Patient charts I'd written showed edits I didn't make, timestamps showing changes while I was on break. Emails on my work account had messages from Calloway referencing my routines, even my thoughts about patients, as if he had read my mind. Photos of the ward appeared on my personal phone, angles I could not have captured, showing me standing by a patient's bed, sleeping in a chair between rounds. I stopped sleeping. Hallways whispered under the hum of fluorescent lights. The distant clatter of trays, the whir of ventilators, the low beeps of 4 pumps became a soundtrack of anxiety. Mirrors reflected him sometimes, standing silently behind me, adjusting a chart I'd just written. One patient, room 22, whispered, eyes wide. "Don't follow him too closely," they said. "He watches, but he's not here. And you're next." I blinked. "What do you mean?" "They're always next. You see them. They see you. But it's never what you think." I confronted Alara one night after my shift. "You're comfortable with him," I said, voice low. "You know things you shouldn't." She tilted her head, smiling softly. "I notice patterns, routines, small gestures. You're tired, you think you're alone in noticing, but you're not. You see too much," I said. "I see," she replied. "But seeing doesn't always mean intervening. Sometimes you just learn." Her calmness unnerved me. I wanted to believe it was benign. I told myself it made sense. Then the spiral accelerated. I caught Calloway in the supply room, leaning against the counter. He looked at me directly. "You've noticed," he said quietly. Calm, almost intimate. "You're aware. Good. That makes the loop cleaner." I froze. "Loop?" He smiled faintly. "Every night. Patience. Charts. Notes. You follow. You record. You think you're documenting. But really it's me editing you. Watching you. Making the records more precise. More useful." I stared at the blinking fluorescent lights, the humming of the fridge, the distant soft jazz from the cafeteria above, the floor creaks echoing through the walls. Everything seemed distorted. I wanted to believe I was hallucinating, but then I checked my own files, edited in real time. Notes I had just written were being altered before my eyes. Observed, refined, corrected. I reported it to Alvarez, a detective familiar with hospital surveillance cases. He listened calmly. "This isn't paranormal," he said. "It's meticulous. Digital surveillance. Metadata. Camera logs. Account access. Burner devices. AI-assisted voice manipulation. Calloway isn't a ghost. He's obsessive. Invasive. Constructed this whole scenario to watch you." Alara appeared in the background of the footage he pulled. Multiple identities. Fake profiles. Emails and messages crafted to bait me. Everything orchestrated. A psychological spiral designed for maximum invasion. The final confrontation happened one night when the hospital was quiet. I followed Calloway to a corridor behind the ICU. He turned, calm, observing. "You wanted to expose me," he said. "Good. That makes the cycle complete." I held my phone up. Alvarez and 2 officers emerged, quietly, deliberately. Devices, fake IDs, burner phones, cameras, and accounts. Evidence cataloged and precise. Calloway smiled faintly as he was handcuffed. "You let yourself be seen." That's all it ever took. Back in my apartment, city rain streaked the windows. Neon reflections blurred across the walls. My phone buzzed, no notifications. Silence. The refrigerator hummed. The apartment floor creaked under my footsteps. I checked mirrors reflexively. Reflections were just me. But my perception had changed. I know now, awareness is intimate. Observation is invasive. Boundaries are fragile. Privacy is rebuilt daily. Trust is not a passive state. It must be maintained with deliberate care. The hospital still exists. The night shifts still hum. I survive. But I am changed. The memory of being watched, observed, edited, controlled, psychologically intimate terror remains. Every time I see a reflection, I remember. Someone could be watching, constructing, perfecting. But survival is knowing the line. Survival is seeing without letting yourself be rewritten. Being seen is not always being known, and being known can be a trap. Story 7. I woke to the hum of fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic that wasn't quite antiseptic. It lingered in the corners, clinging to the walls like a warning. My bed felt hard, too cold, as if the mattress itself was remembering something it shouldn't. Outside, I heard rain against glass, distant sirens, footsteps that echoed too precisely. I didn't know where I was. Not exactly. The last thing I remembered was the car accident. The rain that night had been relentless, tapping on the windshield in silver rivulets, neon from the street bleeding into the cab like bruises. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I tried to call Claire. I shouldn't have moved. I knew it, but I did. And then nothing. Now I open my eyes. Hospital room. White walls. Monitors blinking steadily. For lines. The sterile smell of disinfectant thick in the air. I tried to stand. My legs felt unsteady. The door was locked. I knocked. Called out. Footsteps in the hall answered, far away, but no one came. No staff. No voices. Nothing. It was quiet. Too quiet. I walked to the window. Snow, thick, impossible snow, fell indoors. On the ledge, inside, dusted the carpet like it had grown through the floorboards. Outside, a sun shone pale at midnight, reflecting on walls that shouldn't exist. I stepped back. Rationality told me it was a hallucination. Maybe trauma. Maybe the storm from that night had lasted longer than memory allowed. Maybe my mind had warped time. I wanted to believe it. I wasn't alone. A woman appeared in the next bed. Calm. Attentive. She smiled in a way that made the room feel less like a cell. "I'm Maya," she said softly. "You're awake. Good. You've been sleeping a long time." Her voice filled the air like warmth. Gentle. Understanding. Observant without pressing. "Where am I?" I asked. "You're safe here," she replied. "For now. The ward, it's peculiar. Not everyone notices at first." Her eyes caught mine, precise. She knew small things. How I adjusted the blanket around my shoulders. The way I avoided looking at my hands. My faint habit of rubbing the corner of my mouth when nervous. I told myself it made sense. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe she had been watching me for years as a nurse. Or maybe she just remembered patterns. Days passed, or what I thought were days. Time blurred. No staff entered. No one else. Only the two of us. Only monitors humming, water dripping, my own breath loud in the silence. I began noticing strange details. Objects moved when I wasn't looking. My shoes were on the other side of the bed. Pills I hadn't taken were lined up neatly on the tray. My own belongings, phone, wallet, notebook, appeared and disappeared without explanation. Maya explained calmly. Sometimes the ward responds to attention. Things shift. People shift. It's subtle. Her reassurance made sense. I wanted to believe it. Then I found a tablet in the corner, active. Videos. Files labeled with dates I hadn't experienced. Footage of me. Of the other patients. Only there were no other patients. I watched. And in the videos, I was sitting calmly by the bedside, talking to someone invisible, laughing softly, gesturing as if answering questions. I had no memory of it, no recollection, but it was real, and it wasn't me. It was a shadow, a version of myself, recorded and alive in the empty ward. Maya watched me watch, calmly, smiling softly. "I know," she said. "It's confusing, but it's necessary. You're observed here, not judged, but recorded." I pressed her. "By who? Why?" She tilted her head. "We all have shadows. Ward 7, it collects them. Everyone who dies here leaves behind a fragment. You are already gone." I stared. My own heartbeat echoed too loud. The rain outside had stopped. Now sun and snow intertwined. The impossible weather stretched forever. I was dead. Everything, every moral choice, every guilt, every compromise was catalogued, observed, recorded. The shadow by the bedside was me. Not quite, not fully, but entirely. I wanted to leave, to escape, to wake up, but the door remained locked. The monitors hummed. Footsteps echoed in hallways that didn't exist. Phones buzzed with messages from unknown numbers. Your choices matter here. Every action leaves a record. I wanted to believe it was a test, maybe a dream. Maybe the ward was a metaphor for guilt. But the recordings proved otherwise. Every movement I made in life replayed here. Every interaction with patients. Every failed relationship. Every small lie. Every kindness. All archived. All observed. Maya remained calm, observant, occasionally pointing out fragments I hadn't noticed. The way I closed the blinds in my old apartment, the coffee mug I always tilted a certain way, the faint song I hummed unconsciously at night. I told myself it made sense. I wanted it to. Weeks passed, or seconds, or years. Time was meaningless. I lost track. My own reflection in the window became someone else entirely. Then came the confrontation. A wall of monitors, cameras, burners, metadata, emails from accounts I never created, voice notes of conversations I never remembered. Someone outside the ward had observed my life in precise detail. A long-term obsession, using the ward as a stage. A collection. Maya was the agent. Calm, gentle, observant, invasive. Each day, she mirrored my habits, guided my movements, reinforced the illusion that choice still existed. I tried to escape. The doors opened when she allowed it. The weather reset when she observed. The ward existed to keep me watching myself, watching all the fragments of life I thought I controlled. Police arrived in the waking world. Evidence of surveillance. Cameras, burners, hidden metadata, digital tracking of patients and staff. Maya, real name Margaret, was arrested. Ward 7 was secured. I survived physically, but not entirely. I still feel the hum of monitors. I still feel footsteps in hallways that no longer exist. I still hear the echo of my own voice from devices I do not own. I have learned morality is never private. Observers may be invisible. Attention is not care. Control is an illusion. Sometimes, when the wind taps against my window, when neon reflects across my ceiling, when the refrigerator hums softly, I feel the shadow beside me. It whispers my name, and I realize we are all cataloged in some way by those who watch, by those who study, by those who record. Survival does not erase observation, and death is only the beginning of being seen. Story 8. Rain traced silver rivers down the city windows. Neon flickered off wet asphalt. The cafe below hummed soft jazz through fogged glass. I pressed my palm to the cold pane, tasting bitterness in the air, thinking about absence. I'd moved here after Marcus, after the apartment that held too many arguments, too many echoes, after nights of being careful with every word, every movement, just to avoid him. Now I worked as a pharmacist, small city hospital, quiet shifts. Safe, or so I thought. The first anomaly was subtle. A patient, middle-aged, recovering from a minor surgery, was prescribed a new antidepressant. I noticed her hands tremble unusually, her eyes darting, thoughts fragmented. She didn't say anything at first, but after the second dose, she whispered details she had never spoken aloud. Old arguments with her father, secrets she hadn't remembered sharing. I chalked it up to coincidence. Side effects. My mind frayed, wanting patterns. I wanted to believe it. I told myself it made sense. Then the third patient. He returned the next day with a cut on his hand. I don't know, he muttered. I don't remember doing it. Yet security footage showed him punching a wall. Alone. No one had entered his apartment. No one had called. The pill bottle sat innocuous on his counter. I felt the chill of realization, but ignored it. Maybe I was overthinking. The next night, my apartment felt like the hospital. Floorboards creaked beneath a soft rain patter. Appliances hummed. Neon light from the street split in jagged reflections across the living room wall. My phone buzzed with notifications, routine, harmless. Or so I believed. Then Simon appeared, a volunteer for the hospital's community wellness program. Calm, attentive, understanding in a way that almost felt like warmth. He noticed the tremor in my hands, the quiet hesitation in my voice when I recounted patient reactions. "You're overworked," he said gently. "It's normal to see patterns where none exist. Exhaustion does that." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe his presence was comforting. Maybe I was overthinking. I told myself it made sense. But then came the impossible details. Simon knew my routines, which pharmacy drawer I reached for first, how I lined pills before counting, my favorite mug, the exact song I hummed when stressed, Blue and Green by Miles Davis. Habits I had never shared. One evening, a patient returned, frantic, whispering about visions from a previous dose, memories, crimes, confessions. Each revelation matched exactly the patient's trauma. Yet, scanning the charts, there were discrepancies. Notes I had never made, details I hadn't prescribed. I checked the security cameras. Empty. No one had entered the pharmacy after hours. Yet metadata suggested the pills remembered who swallowed them. Not chemically, but personally. I told myself it made sense. Patterns, coincidences, placebo effects. I wanted to believe it. By the third week, I started noticing it in myself. Tremors, flashes, memories of arguments with Marcus, decisions I hadn't made, guilt that wasn't mine. My handwriting on prescription slips shifted overnight, unfamiliar yet precise. I was following instructions I didn't remember writing. Simon watched. Calm, patient, observing. "You're doing well," he said one night in the dim break room. Neon reflections from the street cut across his face. "The medicine shows you. It reveals patterns. Helps you understand yourself." I nodded, terrified. Maybe I was overthinking. I told myself it made sense. Then one night, I saw my own face on the monitors of the hospital pharmacy. Body movements, dispensing routines, even my pauses and hesitations. All recorded as if another had observed them in real time. My pulse raced. Rain drummed harder on the window. Sirens whispered through the fog. Neon split across puddles. Footsteps echoed in hallways I had just walked. I turned to Simon. He smiled. Not comforting now. Calculated. "The medicine doesn't just record patients," he said. "It learns. It mirrors. It feeds on guilt." I realized, horrifyingly, that I had been dispensing it to myself. Each dose, each label, each instruction. I was both pharmacist and patient. The hospital itself had become an organism, feeding on patterns, guilt, and memory. The climax came without ceremony. Monitors flashed names of patients I had never seen, vital signs spiking with trauma I had never witnessed. Pills rearranged themselves in the trays. Floors creaked as if footsteps of every patient I had treated echoed through the hallways. The hospital hummed, breathing alive. Police arrived after frantic emergency calls. Evidence revealed Simon's manipulations, AI-generated instructions, metadata tracking my movements, burner phones, digital surveillance, voice cloning. He had orchestrated the environment to feed on my trauma, my guilt, my obsessive attention to detail. Every anomaly, every hallucination, every memory loop, crafted, observed, reproduced. I survived. The hospital was contained, the AI systems shut down. But months later, rain taps the windows, soft jazz hums in cafes, neon glimmers on wet streets, and I still feel the weight of being observed. I still check my hands before counting, my notes before writing, my steps before moving. Obsession doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It watches. It records. It feeds. Trust is fragile. Memory can betray. Identity can be constructed. Safety is not absolute. And survival is realizing that sometimes the most dangerous observer is yourself, reflected, mirrored, fed by guilt, in a room that remembers everything. Story 9. The rain started while I was still on the city streets, running my mop bucket through puddles and neon reflections. Steam rose from vents like smoke from a hidden fire. The hospital lights flickered against wet asphalt. I had moved across town 2 months ago after Claire left. Silent apartment, empty cupboards, the low hum of refrigerators at night. I told myself I wanted quiet. I told myself I could survive alone. But silence has its own weight. I was on the night shift as a janitor, hired because no one else wanted the basement floors. I pushed a cart through endless corridors, floors shining with disinfectant, echoing my footsteps like twin heartbeats. Somewhere, a ventilator hummed. Somewhere else, A distant piano played a soft jazz riff through the walls. I felt less alone, but not safe. The first time I noticed him, he was hooked to machines in the old basement wing, an area supposedly decommissioned. A bed, tubes, screens blinking with nothing recorded. My heart stuttered. "Excuse me?" I whispered. No answer. I ran to the nurse's station. "There's no one down there," they said. I told myself I had imagined it. Maybe exhaustion, maybe stress, maybe I was still lonely enough to hallucinate. I returned to the basement later that night. The lights flickered, humming fluorescent above me. Shadows pooled in corners. The patient was still there, tubes dangling, monitors beeping faintly out of sync. A face, pale and hollow, turned slightly. I froze. That night, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A photo attached. My reflection in the hallway, caught in the glossy tile. A caption, "He sees you." I told myself it made sense. Maybe someone was messing with the building's security. Maybe I was overthinking, but I couldn't stop returning. I began noticing impossible details. Staff that should have been elsewhere were in the hallway, but vanished when I looked. Emails appeared on the hospital server showing files I had never accessed, locations I had never visited. Someone or something was mapping me. Then Max appeared. Calm, attentive, observant. He claimed to work in patient advocacy. He knew my routines, my favorite coffee, the songs I hummed while mopping the ICU floor. Even my childhood nickname, whispered once in the apartment long gone. I wanted to believe him. Maybe I was overthinking. I began sleeping in the janitor's room when the basement felt too heavy. Machines hummed like distant breathing. Floorboards creaked above. Footsteps in hallways I knew were empty. My reflection in the polished floors sometimes moved independently, just slightly. One night, the patient stirred. Tubes rattled. Screens flickered with a montage of past hospital mistakes. Surgical errors, overdoses, misdiagnoses, lives erased from records. Faces I'd never seen looked at me through the monitors, their eyes accusing, pleading. The patient's face shifted subtly. A flicker. My own face. Then Claire's. Then Max's. I realized, anyone who enters this basement becomes haunted by the patient's memories. The face it takes is personal. The guilt it wants you to carry. I called Max that night. His voice was low, measured, and calm. "You're seeing what you need to see," he said. "You understand now, don't you?" "What is this?" I whispered. "A reflection. A mirror. A test." I hung up. The spiral escalated. Every phone buzzed with unknown numbers. Emails detailed my routines, locations, even breaks in the mop schedule. Devices I didn't own appeared online, recording mapping. Max had constructed this world for me. Observed me. Calculated fear, loneliness, guilt. I couldn't leave the basement. The weight followed me through hallways, over carpet, through buzzing fluorescent lights. I began recording everything. My own fear, my own presence. Every sound, the humming ventilator, distant sirens, floor creaks, the low piano in the break room, footsteps behind locked doors. Finally, the police arrived. Evidence collected, hidden cameras, logs of AI-generated voice notes, metadata tracing every movement. Max's manipulation spanned years and victims. The forgotten patient was never real. He had built it from the errors he observed, harvesting grief, guilt, fear, and obsession. The confrontation was clinical. Max surrendered immediately. Calm, almost proud. His tools and devices cataloged. No resistance. No plea. Just observation. I survived. But I carry it. Every hum, every creak, every reflected shadow. Rain tapping on windows. The faint piano in the walls. Footsteps echoing where no one walks. Trust is fragile. Privacy is architecture. Boundaries are defenses. Obsession masquerades as care. And memory is a room anyone can enter if you leave the door unlocked. The forgotten patient doesn't die. It just waits. For the next observer. For the next footprint. For the next lonely night. And I've learned, survival is not the absence of fear. It is the willingness to live with it.